Okay, so I did a thing on Pierre Poilievre, Supreme Court, pushed back by the security clearance of Pierre Poilievre and Northern Perspective. And I got some pushback. Can you imagine that? Some pushback. Pushback from the conservative tribe. Or is it the Reform Party tribe? It's a tribe wearing a badge of honor on their sleeve. They identify with this tribe. Personally, I don't care. You're going to say, what? You don't care? I don't care to identify with any tribe. I prefer to do what's right. Now, what I think is right and what you may think is right might be two different things. But through using thought and reason, we may come to a consensus. And that's a hard thing to wrap your head around sometimes, isn't it? To actually use dialogue and come to consensus, to a perspective mutually agreed to. Imagine that. Dialogue, communication. So here we go. Guy comments, more like the wrong Tory. If you're going to bash Northern Perspective, you better make sure you're right and you're not. Well, if there's no right or there's no wrong, it really wouldn't matter, would it? But the fact of the matter is you're saying what is their right and what I stated was wrong. I'm just relaying what the Supreme Court said. Now, that's open for interpretation. If you want to twist that from a straight pretzel into a twisted pretzel, by all means, do so. If that turns your crank, go for it. Next one, no gag order for Pierre. Well, I don't want to gag Pierre because the more he talks, the more stupefying his points of view become when you use a little critical thinking. And that's my point of view. So by all means, no gag order for Pierre. Moving on. I'm sure your ego's going to push back on that one. But that's why I did it. Now, Northern Perspective do great work. I'm sure they do. They provide me something to work with. So they do great work because I can show you a different perspective. Next comment. You're an El Bozo. An El Bozo. Say that to Gordie Howe. What would Gordie Howe say going into the corner? Are you coming out? Are you coming out of the corner? I don't think so. There's another guy. Could be a gal. Could be something in between. But then again, cultural divide seems to be an Alberta thing, Christian nationalist thing, conservative thing. So only people, is what Martineau Center, only people who's never had a clearance think this goofy crap is real. Really. Thank you for your participation. Next one, the kitchen. Something blah, 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 the kitchen. Northern Perspective lays it out real nice and simple for you, and you still don't get it. No, I think for myself. I don't have to ingest anybody else's truth. I derive my own truths using thought and reason. Sometimes they may not align with your thought, but then maybe we could find out where there's a happy medium. Maybe not. So you further state, let's reiterate, Northern Perspective lays it out real nice and simple for you, and you still don't get it. Boomers are running this country. Are running this country? Are running this country? Call the grammar cops on you. Get off YouTube, you goof. Get off YouTube, you goof. You know what Elvis said? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Next one. You know China is ruling Canada. I'm sad for your uninformed opinion. Now, if you think China is ruling Canada, I'm sad for your uninformed opinion. So there we go. So let's go back to what the issue at hand was with Supreme Court and the gag orders and all this stuff. Okay. In an 8-1 decision, the Supreme Court of Canada dismissed the appeal of the Ontario Appeals Court, finding that this is a permissible use of legislation to limit that privilege. So it's well within, the bottom line, it's well within the Constitution. There is no gag order. That gag order is just make-believe stuff. But the gag order pertains to privileged information from only an executive committee. Has nothing to do with parliamentary oversight or any limitation of an MP that oversees committees. And you just don't get it. You're twisting into something else because somebody else wants you to believe differently. So the justice that writes the opinion here in this ruling says, in my view, it cannot be said that Section 12 of the NSICOP Act constitutes an abrogation or elimination of freedom of speech in Parliament as the appellant contends. Justice Malcolm Rowe wrote for the majority, emphasis his. Now, it has a circumscribed effect. It applies only to the disclosure of specific national security information that was obtained by members of the committee through their participation on this and the committee. This is the key point that everybody's missing. It has circumscribed effect. It applies only to the disclosure of specific national security information that was obtained by members of this particular committee through their participation on the committee. Nothing to do with the rest of the parliamentary process. No gag order on that. That's what you have to understand. That's where you're misinformed. So Justice Rowe added that the limit on privilege is narrow because parliamentarians choose to sit on the committee. This is by choice to be on that committee. You're going to be privy to top secret information specific to that committee only. This is where people miss the mark again. And he further states, and it doesn't limit the privilege of other parliamentarians, nor does it affect free speech broadly. Okay? So this gag order stuff is just friggin' nonsense you're making up to empower yourself, to make yourself feel good, to stroke your mind, become no mind to become mind. That's Bruce Lee. Maybe that was Buddha. Or was that Jesus? So Alfred, while he may not have won the appeal, Alfred says the majority's decision is better than he could have hoped. Alfred's the guy that petitioned for the overturning of the Court of Appeals. So what it's further stating in this ruling is there's a clear recognition that there is a constitutional limitation to what you can do with Section 18. This is not only the first time the Supreme Court has said that, it's the first time that any court has said that. So it's now the de facto standard. He says the protection with the Court of Appeals decision, or the problem with the Court of Appeals decision was that it said Section 18 could have been used for anything, including the complete elimination of parliamentary privilege by ordinary legislation. The Supreme Court, including the one dissent, said it is subject to the same limits as Section 44 of the Constitution Act of 1982 regarding amendments. So it's well within the Constitution's framework. And that's the point. So the particular provisions survived, but there was a clear recognition that there is a constitutional standard against which it has to be judged. Furthermore, University of Waterloo political science professor Emmett McFarlane said the majority's decision is clarifying and right. That's correct. So you guys are just making stuff out of nothing. It's just a conservative feel-good moment. It's just a tribe beating their drums to make themselves heard, and that's all it is. Nothing more, nothing less. So you're making twisted pretzels out of a straight pretzel. If it makes you feel good, fine, but it does nothing but provide distortion to that of which is. So that's the thing you have to understand. Now, here we have Mr. Poilievre. Today, June 1, speaking with reporters on Parliament Hill. And I want to bring this to your attention because I think it's very important that we further clarify that from my perspective, this man here, the 7 people with him, have lost their way. and I'll explain exactly what I mean. Take it away, Mr. Poilievre. I skipped the French part. We're at the English part here.
C'est comme ça qu'on va rendre notre économie
Oops, we got a
abordable
little
chez nous,
French.
forte chez nous.
Parlez-vous français, messieurs? Je
Thank you
ne
very
sais
much for
quoi
being here,
c'est.
everybody. Now in English. France is facing tariffs and global economic uncertainty. France is not in a recession. The United Kingdom is facing tariffs and the global energy price increase. And the United Kingdom is not in recession. Germany and Italy are facing global economic effects and tariffs. They're not in recession.
Oh, Japan too?
Japan is facing tariffs and the global economic economy. Japan is not in recession. The United States is obviously facing tariffs and global economic factors like high energy prices, and the United States is not in recession.
The United States is facing tariffs? They're the tariffees. They're tariffing everybody in the world. So, who is this guy here at the podium? Is that Pierre Poilievre? Or is that the Grim Reaper? Sounds like the Grim Reaper so far. And then he misconstrues the United States as being part of all these other countries he mentioned. The United States is the problem. They're the one tariffing everybody around the world. Look what they've done to the Strait of Hormuz.
So why is it that only Canada, after a year of Mark Carney, is in a recession today? Well, you could ask him that question, but he won't take any of your questions. He's hiding from you. It was Friday morning that we learned that Canada's economy was the only one in a recession, the only G7 economy. And what has Mark Carney done since? He's been in hiding. Oh, yes, he let you in for 30 seconds to have a little picture of him with the Chinese foreign minister. Then he hid for the rest of the weekend. Today, he's going to let you show up and take a picture of him wearing a hard hat and carrying a hammer around, pretending he's a carpenter. But he won't have time to take questions on how he created the only recession in the G7. Question period, where normally prime ministers go to answer, especially in a moment of crisis, when the economy has fallen into the only recession in the G7. You would expect him to be there, to be accountable, to show his incredible economic brilliance, but he's not showing up for question period either. While Canadians are starving, losing their jobs, and missing mortgage payments, and Mark Carney has created the only G7 economy in a recession, he is hiding from accountability. Now, Liberals are saying it's only a technicality. Sure, it meets the back-to-back declining GDP, quarter after quarter definition that you find in any textbook, but that's just an economic fluke. Look at the other data. So let's do that. Let's start with jobs. In the first 3 months of this year alone,
look at the other data. You look at my channel, I streamed a feasibility report done by the Bank of Canada, the top two members of that committee. You can watch that. It'll explain in detail what's going on with the economy in a real time from a professional's assessment.
Under Mark Carney, Canada's lost 112,000 jobs. There are 45,000 more unemployed Canadians than there were when Mark Carney became Prime Minister. We have the second highest unemployment in the G7, a third higher than in the U.S. Let's move from there to business investment. Remember all the investment Mark Carney was going to bring us? For 5 consecutive quarters, investment has declined in Canada. There's $20 billion in net investment that has left since he took office. In fact, there's been, when it comes to investment, we have the worst investment per capita of any country in the G7 under his leadership. And by the way, that stacks on top of the $1 trillion of net investment that had already left in the prior 10 years of the Liberal government. And that investment then flows into people's ability to pay their bills. So let's look at that. Equifax put out a data last week showing that insolvency rates have now reached their highest level since 2009, up 19% year over year under Carney. 1.5 million Canadians missed a minimum debt payment.
Oh, he quoted 2009, didn't he? Wasn't that when he and Stephen Harper were in power? But mind you, they did have the great economic crash of 2007, 2008. And that great economic crash was due to everybody balancing budgets and too much private debt to crash the markets. Guess what, folks? Free markets don't correct them. Every boom and bust cycle's proven that.
In the first 3 months of this year, mortgage delinquency rates are up a third in 1 year, and Canada under Carney has the worst household debt of any country in the G7. Just today, the Food Bank's Canada report came out showing, and I'm quoting, something fundamental has shifted in Canada. 1/4 of people are food insecure. That's 1 in 4 people who struggle to access the food they need to be at their best. This sharp rise in food insecurity is not a surprise to the Food Bank network, which has seen demand increase year over year, with visits doubling across Canada since 2020.
And here's the question I need to ask. Mr. Poilievre, we have an $80 to $90 billion deficit. You wanted to cut that down to $48 billion, which means less goes into the economy to help these people that you say are in need. You don't understand, Mr. Poilievre. These deficits help the people that are in need because it gets money into the system to the people that are in need.
A country cannot be strong and resilient when so many people are struggling to pay their essentials. Too many people have incomes that do not meet the cost of living. For one thing, a job is no longer enough to ensure a reliable pathway to stability. Keeping up with rising food costs has become more difficult.
Yeah, and I agree with him. I agree totally with him. And here's the problem. It started back in a guy by the name of Ronald Reagan, and then the Iron Lady, Margaret Thatcher. Smaller government. We got to balance budgets. We got to make everything smaller. And what did that do? That created a cycle of asset inflation versus asset creation. Typical neoclassical Milton Friedman economics. Free markets do not correct themselves. We've seen that. So he is right about this, and we need to take a different trajectory. Now, if you take a look at the big, beautiful bill in the United States, $4.5 trillion went to the top 1% and top 10% in tax breaks. Why did it not go to the bottom of the pile to help the people in real need? Now, you look at Canada. Canada has 43 million people, U.S. 341 million people. So therefore, our population is about 17% of the United States. So let's take that big, beautiful bill and just use a factor of 10% instead of 17%. 10% would be $450 billion. Now, what would have happened to our economy if our politicians would allow for a $450 billion deficit and not go to the top percentile, but go to help everyday people? How would that change the situation? And this is the question you really need to ask, because I'm giving you facts. I'm creating a hypothetical situation based on reality and cause and effect, and you can take what's happened in the U.S., instead of going to the top 1 and 10%, you take just 10% of that instead of 17% on a pro rata basis. 17% would be more in line with what it should be, but I'm only using 10%, almost half. So $450 billion as a deficit went in to help everyday people. How much of a difference would that make? This is the way, you're not looking at it the same way that I am because you don't have the ability. The short-sightedness. And this is just like a jockey at the old Greenwood racetrack. Could be at Woodbine, but it's not the thoroughbreds. Got blinders on. This is where Pierre Poilievre is, and I'm going to explain in further detail so you understand better. And we'll just deal with facts instead of slogans and platitudes.
Difficult even for those who are employed, who now make up 1 in 5 food bank clients. 4 in 10 Canadians are now spending more than 30% of their income on housing, and that number is the threshold to determine that they cannot afford the homes in which they live. The share of people reporting difficulty in accessing care rose steadily from 19% in 2023 to 24% in 2026. So Mr. Carney says we're not in a real recession. He sent out his liberal commentators and economists to say it's just a technicality. Mr. Carney, I have a question for you, and I hope that you'll have the courage to actually look Canadians in the eyes today and be accountable for your recession. The single mother who has to turn back items at the grocery checkout because she can't afford to pay for them.
Hold on, Pierre. Hold that thought for a second. So it's Mr. Carney's recession, or is it Brookfield's recession? You got a large stake in Brookfield yourself, don't you? Yes, you do. And so do a lot of your patriots there with you.
Are you going to tell her that her hunger is just a technicality? Are you going to say to the man who goes home to his kids in Windsor tonight to say that he's lost his job and they're going to have to sell the home, that's only technical? Are you going to tell that young couple that work every day but still can't move out of that 400 square?
See how disingenuous this is? This is disingenuous because he has no solution to fix the problem. He really does not have a solution to fix the problem. Tells you taxes, taxes, taxes. We'll deregulate, create a more toxic environment, deregulate and ram things through. But guess what? He tried to do that with Stephen Harper back before Justin Trudeau became Prime Minister November 2015 and took the reins finally in the new year of 2016. Those are the facts. And we're going to go there.
Square foot apartment, that their inability to own a home is just technical? Or are you going to own up for the recession that you created and get into the House of Commons and do your job to reverse the liberal policies that have made us the only economy with a recession in the G7? We as Conservatives are here to work. We have a plan to reverse the liberal recession.
You have a plan, do you? You know what? Justin Trudeau's father had a plan. It was called the National Energy Program. They started in the 1970s to create energy independence for Canada. It spawned a company called Petro-Canada. But Peter Lougheed didn't like the way things were going. Albertans didn't like the way things were going. And so the National Energy Program got eliminated. Who did it get eliminated by? Conservative government in 1985, Brian Mulroney. This is what really happened. We could have had energy independence a long time ago, but a conservative government stopped it. Alberta government back then, under Peter Lougheed, complained how hard done by Albertans were. This has been a trend going on since the 1970s. Nothing new about this. Now, there are some merits to Alberta's grievances, but there also needs to be an understanding that Alberta is a one-trick pony. And the Athabasca oil sands were very, very expensive and hard to turn into a usable product. Bitumen is very hard. 1/3 of it has to be a sludge material to make it viable to put into a pipeline and transport it. Because without that 1/3 sludge factor, you can't move that bitumen through the pipelines. And it's just as simple as that.
Get rid of the anti-development laws. Cut the red tape to unlock our businesses so that they can grow higher and pay more wages. Cut the bureaucracy, the consultants, the foreign aid, the handouts to phony refugees, the corporate welfare to liberal insiders. Close the tax loopholes that Mark Carney uses to avoid paying his taxes so that we can reduce them for everyone. Use that money to bring down
his taxes or Brookfield's taxes. You know, this is a tricky one there, Pierre. What are you really saying? Because you've got a huge holding in Brookfield. So maybe this is Pierre Poilievre's loophole as well.
On inflationary deficits, taxes. Let's cut taxes on work, investment, savings, home building, and energy so that we can unlock our economy and be the fastest growing in the G7. That is how we're going to make Canada affordable at home, secure at home, and
yeah, you tried that back with Stephen Harper, and what did it do for us? Got us nowhere there, buddy. Got us nowhere whatsoever. Here we go. Let's look at your track record. Prime Minister Stephen Harper's pipeline legacy was defined by his push to make Canada an energy superpower. By fast-tracking projects to export landlocked Alberta oil, this aggressive strategy, particularly the Northern Gateway and Keystone XL proposals, bypassed rigorous First Nations consultation and triggered historic, legal, and grassroots pushback. The policy push, energy superpower. Hearing the same thing over and over again. Didn't work then, it's not going to work now. Not the way Pierre Poilievre wants to do it. So former Prime Minister Stephen Harper aggressively pursued a goal of transforming Canada into an energy superpower by linking Alberta's landlocked oil sands to international markets. Key projects central to this vision included Northern Gateway Pipeline, proposed by Enbridge. This $8 billion, 177-kilometer pipeline aimed to carry diluted bitumen from the Athabasca oil sands to Kitimat, British Columbia, to be shipped by tankers to Asian markets. Keystone XL, Trans-Canada Pipeline designed to significantly expand the delivery of Alberta crude into the United States. And here's the thing. Alberta provides 60% of the exported oil from the United States. So Alberta sells to the U.S. at a great discount. USA refines it, marks it up, and sells it to the market to benefit the United States. Now, the regulatory changes to speed up development, the Harper administration overhauled environmental assessments in 2012, amending acts like the Navigable Waters Protection Act to consolidate approvals and reduce perceived red tape. First Nations backlash and legal battles. The push to accelerate pipeline construction without meaningful consultation ignited severe opposition from Indigenous communities, culminating in major pushback. Save the Fraser Declaration in 2010. Over 130 First Nations in BC signed this declaration, committing to ban crude oil tankers carrying tar sands oil from their traditional territories and watersheds. Idle no more. 2012. The government's regulatory overhauls and marginalization of environmental concerns sparked this massive grassroots and Indigenous protest movement, which shut down railways, highways, and disrupted business. Supreme Court rejections. Because the federal government tried to exclude meaningful Indigenous consultation, Danielle Smith not consulting with First Nations and having a referendum? Deja vu time, eh, kids? Deja vu time. You just keep doing the same thing over and over. Keep trying to ram a huge round peg into a small square hole. It doesn't work. So Supreme Court rejections. Because the federal government tried to exclude meaningful Indigenous consultation, First Nations effectively fought back in court. Ultimately, the Federal Court of Appeal struck down the approval for the Northern Gateway Pipeline in 2016, citing the Crown's failure to properly consult with affected First Nations. And then, because there was a recession caused by that conservative government, man, Stephen Harper, Pierre Poilievre caused a recession, and then a guy by the name of Trudeau took over, and then he built the Trans-Canada Pipeline. But then fourth quarter 2019, we had COVID-19, the worst pandemic in over 100 years. But nobody talks about that and the inflationary factor it caused worldwide. So the legacy here of Stephen Harper and Pierre Poilievre's tenure as stewards of the Canadian economy prior to Trudeau. So the last 10 years of Trudeau was the last 10 years before that of Harper and Poilievre. So Harper's top-down approach, kind of like Donald Trump's big, beautiful bill, give $4.5 trillion to the top 1% and 10%. Harper's top-down approach ultimately backfired on his own political agenda. Despite his government's revisions, no major new export pipeline was successfully built and brought to completion. What? Conservative government of Harper and Poilievre did not bring any pipeline, no matter how hard they rammed it down the throats of everyday people. They just couldn't do it. But they only blame liberals for everything that's ever happened. So Why don't you blame the NDP? Why don't you blame the Green Party? Why don't we all take responsibility and just change the way we do things and learn from the past, because we only live in the present and do things differently in the present, so we can change the past in the present so we can move forward to a better future. How about trying that? So, new export pipeline, no major new export pipeline was successfully built by either Harper or Poilievre during their tenure. And his party suffered political losses as climate and indigenous rights controversies just escalated. So we can look back at that, but we're not going to look back at that. Why do we want to look back at that? So there you go. Now here's the coup. Coup? That's not the right word. Let's look at something differently. High-speed rail. Now we want to do high-speed rail. And who wants to stop the high-speed rail project? Mr. Pierre Poilievre. Doesn't want to invest in Canada. Meanwhile, there was a guy by the name of, he was the President of the United States, Dwight Eisenhower. Major massive highway build in the United States. Unprecedented at that time, back in the 1950s, 60s. So now here we want to do high-speed rail. Pierre Poilievre wants to nix that. We can't spend the money. So you can't invest in your own country. Is that what you're saying, Mr. Pierre Poilievre? Now, Bill Kelly does an interesting anecdotal representation here. So let's listen to Bill Kelly.
Side with this, a rather short-sighted, leader of the opposition here in Parliament, Mr. Poilievre, is dead set against this. He wants the federal government to scrap that plan. But I mean, clearly, Mr. Poilievre just doesn't seem to have any vision for any of these projects, for the stuff that's economic drivers. And it's important that we just push that kind of a mindset aside. We got to think big, and we have to be creative about these sorts of things. And this is not reinventing the wheel. This has already been done and already worked in other parts of the world, in other parts of this country. And I think it's an idea whose time has come for what's going to be happening along that corridor over the next little while. And I was just looking at some of the polling on this after this. It's not just getting on the train and going to Quebec City for the Winter Carnival or for the fabulous summers up there, or going down to Toronto for whatever reasons you might have to go to that fabulous city too. It's in between. It's those stops in between, and it's the economic growth in between that can occur. Now, this is not the first time we've talked about a super train, but I don't know that anybody before has actually presented the argument and I think the very, logical economic uptake that can actually happen as a result of this. So there's a lot of discussion still to be had about this. Price tags, the details about it, as we mentioned earlier, where are the stops going to be? Because you have to identify those, because those are going to be potential growth areas economically and otherwise, and residentially. So I applaud the Carney government for having the vision to look at something like this, not just as a place to get from A to B, but as a place to grow in between A and B. And that's the sort of foresight and that's the sort of vision that we need from this government and for this country to go forward and to actually realize their economic potential. So good on them. That's it for this edition of the podcast. Glad you could be with us for this.
So there you go. So here's the thing. If we balance the budget, we don't invest in rail, we'll get asset inflation of properties continually. Nobody remembers the OPEC problem of the 1970s, where oil went through the roof. Alberta, guess what, with Alberta? One-trick pony oil. When the prices go up, they do great. When the prices go down, they do not do great. Craters their economy. Meanwhile, back in that period of time, you had mortgage rates up to 20%. What would you feel about now? Mortgage rates of almost 20% because of the way Donald Trump is cratering the world economy. A conservative, a Republican, cratering the world economy. One thing about Donald Trump, he's showing us how you do not want to run a country, do not want to run a world, because that's not the way you want to live. Can't go back in time and bring it forward. It doesn't work that way. But what's my point? My point is there's more to this than you realize. And I'm going to bring this over. This has to be brought to your attention because the Strait of Hormuz and what's happening is a serious problem. People don't realize how serious it really is. Oh, but before we do, I want to bring this up. Bring this pet peeve. This is Alberta's 9. These are the 9 problems that Alberta has with Canada. They want guaranteed full access to unfettered oil and gas corridors to the northeast and west. Repeal Bill C-69. No new pipe. There's no, that's an acronym you've made up. No New Pipelines Act. It's BS. Nonsense. Lifting the tanker ban off the BC coast. Eliminating the oil and gas emissions cap, which is a production cap. That's just friggin' pollute the hell out of the environment. Scrapping the so-called clean electricity regulations. You don't want clean energy? You don't want renewable energy? It is the future. You can go back in time. But renewables are the future. We're getting better at it. China is a perfect example of that. We're not ruled by China. But China will end up ruling the world because of their hybrid economy, which is, since after the Second World War, has been operating at just over 2 times the rate of growth of the North American economy. Ending the prohibition on single-use plastics has got to be the dumbest friggin' thing you could ever do. Minute particles just toxic to your body. You can't see it. And because you can't see it, you think you got to use it. You know what it does to landfills? Do you know what it does to the seabed? You know what it does to the fish and the animals that you want to hunt? You know, you can go to a supermarket also. And returning oversight of the industrial carbon tax to the provinces. Halting the federal censorship of energy companies. This is the wish list of Danielle Smith and Alberta. So there you go. Now you got that. Now let's look at this one here. Now this is something you have to understand. The aluminum shock hitting the global economy. Why is that happening? Okay, so this was done just a day ago. Now, the Strait of Hormuz. The effects of what's going on there is yet to hit the markets. So you better fasten your seatbelt. If you think we got problems now, wait till the effects of what's really been going on in the Strait of Hormuz start affecting the worldwide economy. It's not hit yet. You really cannot sit at a podium and be smug and say this, that, and this. We ain't seen nothing yet.
Trying to have it both ways. Since he first became president, Donald Trump has sought to protect the U.S. aluminum industry through tariffs. But the war in Iran may be taking us in a very different direction. Our colleague Chrystia Freeland tells us a story of a key metal that is caught in the middle.
Aluminum foil keeps foods from drying out while sealing in all their natural flavor.
When you think about aluminum, the first thing that comes to mind.
And also, I'm going to remind you, the aluminum and steel tariffs the Americans have put on Canada
Might be tinfoil or soda cans, but it's also an essential component of cars, planes, and machinery. It's the world's most abundant metal, but even that hasn't kept aluminum safe from the fallout of war.
The supply is now depleted by about half of the metal that used to be shipped from the Middle East because there's been some damage and there's been some curtailments to avoid further damage.
Jean Simard is the president and CEO of the Aluminum Association of Canada.
It's a very significant situation for the aluminium sector worldwide because the Middle East produces 20% of all the aluminium outside China. And it ships to Asia, but mostly to the US and to Europe.
Of the top aluminum producing countries in the world, 2 are in the Middle East. And Simard says the impact of the war in Iran could be long-lasting.
Starting at the beginning of the crisis, the first curtailment happened in Qatar because of an energy supply situation, and then damage was done in Bahrain, and then to the Al Tawila smelters in the Emirates. This is very significant because it will take a long time to bring it back. Smelters are very highly impacted by energy, and to restart a smelter, you have to do like, if there's a supply problem with electricity for your house, you have to unplug everything and then replug one at a time. So they can only start back 2 cells a day out of hundreds and hundreds of cells.
Production is just one part of the aluminum supply chain facing disruption. Distribution is another. Like so many of the world's exports, aluminum needs to be shipped, often a long way. and shipments are snarled by the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz.
The problem is what's in front of us. The last ship to leave the Middle East just before the beginning of the crisis has made it to the US. There's no other ship on its way. It took 60 days to get there. So the full shock is ahead of us. I'm not too sure that all downstream transformers, processors, mom and pop shops that use aluminum are fully aware of what's ahead of them.
In the first 2 weeks of the war, the price of aluminum on the London Metal Exchange saw double-digit gains, shooting to record highs. But while the war added to rising prices around the world, some of the fallout in the U.S. is self-inflicted. Last year, President Trump hiked tariffs on imports of aluminum to 50%, with the intention of stimulating domestic production. As of 2025, the U.S. was dependent on imports to meet some 60% of internal aluminum consumption. And that was something that the Trump administration didn't like.
The U.S. is a short market on primary aluminum, so the U.S. need to import a lot of primary aluminum to fill demand. So to attract that metal, then U.S. consumers or manufacturers using aluminum in effect have to pay the duty on aluminum into the U.S. market.
Trond Olaf Christoffersen is the CFO of Norsk Hydro, a publicly traded aluminum producer based in Norway. The company is also in the unique position of having a production facility in Qatar.
Our joint venture in Qatar, Qatalum, has been impacted by the war and is currently operating around 60% production capacity because of the situation. And we continue to operate around that level. It is a challenging situation with the raw material access and also to get metal out from the region. But we are continuing to operate at that production level.
And so is the U.S. now facing more of an aluminum crisis than other parts of the world?
Well, the supply situation, I think, is, or the situation in Middle East impacts the supply situation in all markets. Physically, when it comes to supply, I think the Asian market is worse impacted because quite a lot of the metal from the Middle East is normally sold in Asia, around 2.5 million tons. But the price impact is global.
This isn't the first time the United States has imposed tariffs on Canadian aluminum. In 2018, when I was foreign minister, the trade spat between our two countries ended with the U.S. backing down. And although the U.S. is facing higher aluminum prices today, Simard says that's not a direct effect of the war in Iran. That's because the vast majority of aluminum the United States imports comes from Canada.
When the tariffs, the 50% tariff were implemented, it created a price shock in the market for exporters into the U.S., as Canada is one of them. And basically the reaction was to divert shipments to another market which covered the full logistical costs and the whole net back that would differentiate this destination from the US. One thing is sure, if you want to get all the available supply from Canada, you have as a policymaker in the US to do a carve out for Canada within the global tariff situation right now. If that doesn't happen, Canada will go where the market is.
Among the industries that are most affected by higher aluminum prices are packaging and transportation, from trains and trucks to mopeds and bikes. And that's where Brendan Moore comes in.
Fundamentally, aluminum is one of the primary materials used on a bicycle. The reason is it's very light, very strong, reasonably priced. You know, it's not a super exotic metal.
Moore's company, Wolftooth Components, makes premium bike parts that are shipped all over the world. His manufacturing plant in the suburbs of Minneapolis is about 7,000 miles from the Strait of Hormuz, but he's still feeling the consequences of the war in Iran.
We're a small company like us. We're not Boeing, so we don't get to say, Kaiser, send us 10 truckloads of aluminum. We buy our aluminum through suppliers locally, and those suppliers will source that from various suppliers around the world. We don't get a lot of choice in where our aluminum comes from, but I can tell you that it's shifted. And we do have a preference for U.S. aluminum.
Eventually, the only solution for a manufacturer like Moore might be to raise prices. But he says it's not so simple.
In consumer goods, I always say it's not like when you go to the restaurant and there's like lobster pricing and it's like market rate. That's not how consumer goods work. And when prices of aluminum or raw material go in, we can't necessarily just like raise our prices right away. Raising prices, remember, does three really bad things. One, it upsets your customers. Two, it puts you at a disadvantage to your competition. And three, it's actually a lot of work. And so when aluminum goes up, effectively, initially, we just eat it. It just comes right out of our bottom line.
Moore has seen peaks and valleys in the price of aluminum before, but he says this time is different.
If you look, there was COVID, which aluminum prices started going up, but then actually the biggest peak was right when the Russian war started. Just went crazy high, and then tariffs came in, and then the Strait of Hormuz was closed. But the biggest thing people aren't talking about, and you're seeing this broadly across commodities, is the AI build-out is actually one of the big impacts for aluminum prices going up right now. Those data centers that we all hear so much about, they use a ton of raw material, and a lot of it's aluminum. And so kind of we're seeing like a triple whammy now, if you will.
Smaller manufacturers like Wolf Tooth Components not only have to contend with higher prices for the metal they need, but also have to compete against bigger, more powerful players that also use aluminum. The squeeze could eventually raise prices across the board for consumers, triggering another bout of inflation.
There's really no viable alternative to aluminum in our case. And you'd hear the same thing if you asked Boeing. Like, they're still going to use tons of aluminum in the airplanes, no matter what the price is. And the price of those airplanes will just go up. Same with our bicycle parts.
As the war drags on, so does the timeline for prices to stabilize. Back in Norway, Christoffersen says the outlook is far from certain.
So in the aluminum market, I think we see a bit the same situation as you see in the energy markets, where you have quite high prices in the front end, meaning metals to be delivered in the coming month. But then you have a declining price, a backwardation situation in the market with lower prices falling down to $3,000 per ton a couple of years out in time.
So it will take anywhere between 12 to 18 months for the Middle East supply that's been affected to come back into the market. And then you need 60 days to ship to North America that you add to this. So we're heading for a supply shock as we move through the summer period. And this will last most likely for about a year and a half, until this supply starts to make its way back into the market.
For business owners like Brendan Moore, the effects of domestic and foreign policy have become an unavoidable hazard of the job.
We control the processing, we control our efficiency, we control our yields. So we have to just focus on those. So I think near term, we're going to be able to mitigate most of the aluminum prices. Longer term, if it stays this high, there has to be some sort of increase. But a consumer, if aluminum goes up 20% again this year, our prices of our products aren't going to go up 20%. They're going to go up like 3 or 5%. And I like Boeing. I'm not trying to poo-poo them at all, but like, we don't have the negotiating power that, say, they have or an automaker has. And when these prices change or tariffs change, I see that almost the same day. I mean, not joking sometimes. Well, I didn't start this small business because I wanted to learn about tariffs or deal with massive supply chain issues or deal with geopolitics. Those are, in fact, some of my least favorite things. Bicycles are way more fun than that stuff.
With all the back and forth of tariffs and wars, it's hard to see how U.S. policy, at the moment, is helping American manufacturers or American consumers. And this is one problem that the marketplace can't fix on its own.
This is a story about...
So there you go. Trump creating chaos around the world. As a matter of fact, the United States and Trump, Benjamin Netanyahu, and Israel are creating chaos around the world for everybody. Unnecessarily, not needed. We need to change how we do things. And I've shown you as well Pierre Poilievre. I've provided rebuttals to his existence and his party's existence right now. We need to work together, get away from this pain and suffering, this nonsensical war situation, tariffs, and get into a state a state of benevolence, harmony, and abundance. It starts by being kind to yourself, your neighbor, and people you deal with every day. Live in a position of gratitude. Very important for all of us. It's up to you. Take care. Love and peace. Ciao for now.